I think we're going to go ahead and get started with the next section of our event today. This is our plenary session on Bridging the Gap, Skills Policy 2020. So, and I should stop. How's everybody doing? Everybody having a good day?
Yay.
Good. Good. We solved the future of work? Okay, good. We'll be looking at the Post-it notes in a few minutes. So, all right. So, for folks who have not seen enough of me already, I'm Kermit Kaleba. I'm the managing director of policy here at National Skills Coalition, and I am delighted to have on stage with me today two distinguished guests who are going to share with us a little bit of thinking about the administration's approach to skills policy as we look ahead to 2020 and beyond. So I'm joined by John Pallasch. John is the Assistant Secretary for the Employment and Training Administration at the U.S. Department of Labor. And Casey Sachs. Casey Sachs is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Community Colleges at the Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education at the U.S. Department of Education. And we wanted to bring John and Casey in today to talk to us a little bit about sort of how the administration, how their agencies are approaching skills policy, what their priorities are for this year, but also to give an opportunity to talk with some of you all about how we as a field, and I was telling John and Casey, we have a very diverse field represented here in this room. We've got about 550 folks from more than 40 states representing a range of different stakeholders, community colleges, community-based organizations, business leaders, labor unions, workforce boards, to talk about how the field can be working with the administration and with your agencies to advance the skills agenda for the 21st century. So, why don't I go ahead and get started, and John, I'm going to start with you. Can I just start by asking you to share some initial thoughts on ETA's key priorities for 2020, and what are the issues that you're finding the most exciting and the most energizing about your work right now?
Thank you. So the first issue that comes to mind, and I'm going to apologize in advance because Casey's heard this a few times already, because we always seem to be traveling together, which is good. Just to put a point on that, one of the first things I did when I got to DC in July of last year was call the Department of Education. Scott Stump, who runs the Career and Technical Ed office, as well as Johnny Collette, who was the former Assistant Secretary of Vocational Rehab, and reached out to them and said, hey, listen, we need to make sure that WIOA is being implemented the way it's supposed to. And that starts with the Department of Education and the Department of Labor being on the same page. So I appreciate Casey being here. I appreciate Casey and Scott's leadership. And that kind of gets to the first priority I have, the kind of the big ticket issue that I'm working on is this idea of one workforce. How do we at the federal level remove the barriers, remove the hindrances that prevent the folks at the state and local level from actually creating one workforce system, rather than a workforce system that's got some education programs in it and some labor programs in it and some HUD programs in it and some VA programs in it. And the guiding principle to me is a public law 102477, and I'm sure you've all read that cover to cover. But what 102477 allowed for is it allowed Indian and Native American tribes to, through the Bureau of Indian Affairs, receive funding from a number of federal agencies. That funding would in essence come through the Bureau of Indian Affairs. It would be washed, it would become BIA money. That money would then flow down to the tribe. The tribe would put together what's called a 477 plan, which is akin to a state plan under WIOA, to say, hey, here's how we're going to spend these funds. That plan goes back to the partners who put the money in. They all bless it. And then Bureau of Indian Affairs does the monitoring, and the tribe reports to the Bureau of Indian Affairs. That's it. So they're able to take money from education and labor and HUD and agriculture and in essence wash it and do away with the administrative burden of having to report to the Department of Ed and having to report to the Department of Labor. And that's a model that I'd really like to try to expand out from the tribes to take away a lot of the bureaucratic administrative functions that we as the federal community place on the states and locals because of the complex funding streams. We've talked about block grants forever and a day in workforce, and this is a step in that direction. So that's one of the big priorities I have is, do we have the pilot authority, the demonstration authority, the waiver authority to allow Federal agencies, like I said, such as HUD, agriculture, VA, energy. I mean, the number of departments out there that have workforce programs. I just learned that the Department of Transportation has a workforce program. So there are workforce programs scattered all across the federal community. And to the extent that we're able to work together as one federal workforce and provide that funding to the states and locals and let the states and locals decide what that's going to look like and build those relationships with the employer community and the business community to deliver the skills that are needed and not be thinking about, oh, wait, is this WIOA money or is this Title IV money or where is this money coming from and who do I owe the report back to and who's getting credit for this person? Who gets the +1 for serving this customer? So that's something I've been working pretty aggressively on and really want to try to see through during this calendar year. We're also focusing extensively on priority of service. With an economy as strong as it is, we all know the numbers, 22 straight months under 3.5% or under 4% unemployment, 3.5% is the current unemployment rate. There's about 1 million more jobs out there than there are people looking for jobs. The only way we're going to be able to feed the need of employers is by pulling in those folks that are not part of the workforce. That's what priority of service was intended to do under WIOA. We, as the Department of Labor, Employment Training Administration, haven't done a good job in terms of defining and providing technical assistance to the states on exactly how they go out and engage that population. So that's another thing that we're going to be working on in the near future is a plan to assist states to bring the dignity of work to kind of the forgotten men and women, depending on who you talk to, between 35 and 37 million people who aren't part of the workforce. So how do we, in an economy as strong as this, bring more of those folks back into the workforce? And then obviously upskilling, reskilling, the apprenticeship program at the Department of Labor, that's a continuous theme through everything that we're doing. We're constantly trying to figure out how we can provide the flexibilities and the models to the states and locals that allow them, again, working with their business community, understanding what the jobs of the future are going to be in their state or their local workforce area, and then giving them the flexibility through community colleges, through apprenticeship programs, through certificate programs, to deliver those skills to those individuals so that they can fill the needs of the workforce going forward. So that at a high level is some of the things I'm looking at.
All right, thank you so much. So Casey, I've got a similar question. What are your key priorities for 2020, and what are the issues that you're most excited about working at Octave right now?
Yeah, so 2020 for us is going to be really exciting. In summer of 18, Congress reauthorized the Perkins Act. So if you're not an education person or you're not super familiar with this, the Perkins Act is a $1.3 billion a year federal investment in career and technical education at both the secondary level and post-secondary levels. So states get these funds in a block grant and then make decisions about where the investment's needed most and then act accordingly. Mm-hmm. So with the reauthorization, everybody's been very busily planning what are we going to do with our Perkins funds with this new act. Those are due to the department in April. So actually right now, they're out for public comment in your states, and it's a great opportunity for you to really get engaged and to read through how does career and technical education interact with our WIOA funds? Mm-hmm. What does it look like to have a partnership between workforce and our colleges? And what should that look like? And to really set that definition. But so Perkins plans will come in April. I'm really excited about that. We plan on doing a big splash for each state as they get approved and really helping amplify what is it that people are doing and what's innovative and what are states thinking. There's a lot of new provisions in the new act that I'm actually quite excited about. So that has been a very fun part of being in the department in this particular time. We have a few other initiatives that I think you might be interested in that I'm also really excited. The first is for something called Second Chance Pell. So we have a provision that allows people who are experiencing incarceration to access Pell grants so that they can get an education while they're still incarcerated. So this provision existed through the 90s, and then during the tough on crime period in the 90s, that got repealed. And now we've been doing an experiment with almost 70 institutions to figure out, would this work? And we're seeing some really promising initial results and really want to expand it. So I'm hopeful that we can collaborate with Congress in this next session to figure out how to get some permanent solutions to that second chance Pell and really be able to change that in a meaningful way. And we're certainly excited about things like ability to benefit, which also might be of interest to this group. Ability to benefit is completely allowed in a provision that exists right now within the Higher Education Act for folks who don't have a GED or its equivalent to be able to take advantage of financial aid so that they have an ability to benefit from enrolling in post-secondary programs. And so it's really helping states and colleges, community colleges especially, understand what they have to do to meet those provisions. So it's about enrolling in approved career pathway programs, and then figuring out how do you move forward through that career pathway program while still having the opportunity to earn your GED or an equivalent certification. But those are a few things that I feel like would be relevant to all of you that I'm also looking forward to.
Okay, great. So I think you guys have already raised a couple of issues I'm sure folks in our audience are going to be interested in asking questions about. So let me, so John, the folks in this audience are all going to be most of these folks are going to be heading up to the Hill tomorrow to talk with their members of Congress about advancing skills policies on the Hill. And one of our, I know one of the priorities that we've identified is reauthorization of WIOA. WIOA is technically up for reauthorization this year. I understand we've got the State of the Union tonight, we've got the budget coming out next week, so there may be some things that you're not able to share with us quite yet, but I guess, could you share with us a little bit about sort of how ETA is currently working with states and other stakeholders as we're heading into, we're still in the implementation phase in many ways of WIOA. Can you tell us a little bit about how you're working with states and other stakeholders as they're heading into this new planning cycle, and if you have any thoughts on sort of priorities for WIOA reauthorization? I know you mentioned priority of service and sort of getting clearer guidance around program administration, but any thoughts you have on that?
Yeah, so one of the main pieces of technical assistance that I'm making sure ETA is providing to the states is when I was running the state workforce agency in Kentucky, I had asked the Department of Labor to come out and provide joint governance training with us. And the purpose of that governance training was to make sure that everybody across the state understood what their role was under WIOA. And there was an attorney at the Department of Labor who had gone literally section by section through the law and broken down who was the lead and who was to collaborate on each one of those sections. And that became a tool that we used in that training so that the governor knew exactly what his or her responsibilities were in terms of leadership and collaboration. The state workforce board, the local workforce board, the state workforce agency, all of the different partners, just so everybody understood the lay of the land. Because even though WIOA is now, 6 years old, there's still, the workforce system is still trying to digest it. So when I got to DC back in July, I asked our regional administrators to begin reaching out to states, and for any states that were interested to provide that governance training, to kind of reset things, to level set things at the states so everybody, all of the partners know these are our responsibilities. WIOA reauthorization is an exciting opportunity, but there's also plenty of flexibility that exists in the current law that we, as the federal community, haven't communicated well enough to the states and locals to know that this flexibility is available. Some states, and Kentucky was guilty of this, like to wait for the Department of Labor to issue what we call a TEGL, which is a Training Employment Guidance Letter. Basically a TEGL to tell the states what they can do. I don't want states to be waiting for us to issue a TEGL, because if any of you know about a federal clearance process, we have 700 attorneys at the Department of Labor. I'm not lying. We have 700. So in order for us to get a TEGL out the door, it takes, 4, 5, 6, 7 months to do that. So what I've asked and I've empowered our regional administrators to do is to engage with their state partners to understand what the states and the locals are wanting to do, and then forcing us to say no rather than states and locals waiting for us to say yes. I want that innovation to live where it needs to live, which is at the local level, because everybody knows at the local level what's happening, what the growth industries are, what the employers need, what the education system is turning out. We don't know in DC, so waiting for us to issue guidance on a lot of the flexibilities in WIOA is just, it's not productive in terms of the states and the locals being able to be responsive. So I encourage anybody in this room who's working with their state and local partners, if there's things that you want to try, if there's in your reading of the law or in the section that pertains to you, you think, hey, I think we can do this, and no one has tried to do this. I implore you to talk to our regional administrators in ETA and say, hey, we're thinking about doing this in our state. Can you tell us that we can do that? Or at the very least, can you tell us that you're not going to say no? And I will make sure that we are responsive, because that's the most important thing for me is, again, for us to remove that burden coming from DC that invariably stifles that innovation at the local level, because everything becomes a compliance exercise. And we talk about the state plans, and the state plans are coming due in March. And if I had gotten to DC earlier, we would have really looked to revamp that state plan process, because I don't know how useful the state plan process is, either at the state level or at the federal level. When you're talking about 400, 500, 600-page documents, and that's how long they are, I don't know how that becomes an actionable document that the state can do something with. So again, anything we can do to kind of remove the compliance aspect of you must do this, you must do that, and you can only do these things when we tell you you can do those things, and allow you all to come to us with ideas and say, hey, here's what we're doing. Perfect example is pay for performance. For those of you that are familiar with that flexibility that exists in the law, DOL, shame on us, has been dragging our feet for 2 years to issue this guidance. It doesn't mean states can't take advantage of pay for performance. And we're already working with a few states to say, hey, don't wait for the guidance. What is it you want to do? Let us work with you now. So just keep that in mind when folks are saying, well, we're not sure if Department of Labor is going to allow us to do that. Ask the question. Make us take a stand one way or the other. And I assure you, I will commit that everybody in ETA will do everything we can to give you maximum flexibility under the law, because that's what's needed in order for you all to be able to read and react to the changing economy, the future skills, automation, AI. We can talk about all those big scary things coming. But if we give you the flexibility and the ability to pivot and change locally, then AI isn't that scary. Then automation isn't that scary. Then quantum computing isn't that scary. So.
All right. This may be the wrong group to give that kind of permission to. But I encourage everyone to take him up on his offer. So Casey, I want to, you mentioned Perkins. Obviously you guys have been in the process of dealing with implementation on your own, on your own program. Can you share with us a little bit, I know the states are still finalizing their plans, but can I ask you to share a little bit about what you're seeing about how states are modernizing their approach to career and technical education? And in particular, I know one of the big changes under Perkins was a renewed emphasis, or kind of a new emphasis, on equity and access for populations that have traditionally been left out of career and technical education. Can you share a little bit about what you're seeing from the states, and some things that are encouraging, maybe some things that are discouraging?
Yeah, so one of the things, so the provision, maybe for those of you who aren't as dorky as I am in reading entire acts, is that we've asked states to disaggregate their program level data by a number of what we call special populations. So we see the sort of traditional, anyone who's worked in Perkins knows that we've always looked at program level data and looked at gender and said, how do we get more women in welding, and how do we get more men in nursing, and ask those kinds of questions of programs, and really dedicated funds to looking at gender equity within programs. But this new act doubles down on special populations and asks schools to disaggregate their program level data and look at homeless students, and look at veterans, and look at certainly at some of the traditional indicators, looking at race, looking at gender, but really digging into their program level data and figuring out where are our gaps and what is it that we need to do as a community to address those gaps. So I've been really encouraged because we've got a lot of folks who are interested in analytics. We've got a lot of folks who are leveraging the latest technology. I've been a little discouraged because there are certainly states that don't have robust longitudinal data systems, and so asking questions about homeless students, for example, that's something that Some of our K-12 partners collect really well because of McKinney-Vento, but it's something that a lot of our post-secondary partners don't collect at all because it's not even in their student information system, and it's never sort of been on anyone's radar to say, gosh, Casey, are you homeless? And so figuring out how to integrate some of our data systems is something that I feel like is certainly a challenge as we're asking states at the same time to disaggregate data. But it has been really exciting. I saw when I was in Colorado, one of my math programs at Community College of Aurora disaggregated all of their program level data and had faculty look at their courses by race and student success based on race. And what they found is that John was differently successful with different populations than Casey might be. And then the faculty went and observed each other's classes and said, gosh, you're more successful with this population of students than I am. What is it that you're doing that's different than how I approach the classroom? And what are things that I can learn from you? And so they really took that as an opportunity to lesson study and to learn from each other and to interact with each other. And we're starting to see that kind of work replicated in career and technical education. And so those are things that I've been really encouraged by.
Great. One last question, then I want to open it up for audience questions. So John, I want to pick up on some of the reflections that Casey had. Folks in this audience I know are very deeply concerned and deeply interested in making sure that workforce development creates meaningful opportunities for all workers, and particularly making sure that we're addressing historic barriers to access and success for specific populations that have been left behind. Can I ask you to you sort of alluded to this a little bit in your first answer as well. Can I ask you to share a little bit about how the field can be working with ETA, and Casey, I might ask you to also answer this, how we can be working together to better address equity gaps, and how can our state and our local partners here work with your agencies to make sure that we have broadly shared prosperity?
The key to economic mobility and the key to ensuring that everybody has an opportunity to achieve that dignity of work that we talk about, a lot of it starts with changing the culture a little bit in terms of how we determine success. Success for our high school students, what does that look like? We graduate about 3.7 million students a year from high school. If we could, at the very least, just make sure that those 3.7 million people graduating are that much closer to being job ready, we will have done something. But beyond that, we've got to think more in terms of the multiple pathways that we talk so much about here in DC is how do we create avenues for individuals who are going to work right out of high school, or going to a certificate or a credential program, or going to a 2-year degree, or going to an apprenticeship program, or going into a 4-year degree. How do we make sure, how do we work with students and counselors and parents to understand where those students are at a given point in their life, and then provide them kind of that course choice that allows them to self-select, here's where I think I want to go when I graduate. Here's the things that I think that I'm good at. And are we able to shape the curriculum, shape what they're being exposed to really draw out those interests? And I fully appreciate that a 16 or a 17-year-old may think they want to be a fireman when they graduate, and when they graduate they actually end up being a nurse. Two completely different things. I get that. They're going to change their minds. But to the extent that we start thinking about everybody being a little bit different and really meeting the customer or the student where they are with an assessment, really understanding what their barriers are and how we can overcome those barriers and then help them get and keep a job. One of the data points within the WEO or performance measures that gives me pause is about 28% of the folks that the public workforce system puts in a job don't have that job 6 months later. And that to me is a telling stat. I posit, and I don't know definitively, I've asked our folks to look into this, but I make the argument that that's because we didn't address the barriers. There was a soft skill issue. There was some other barrier that prevented that person from succeeding. It wasn't the hard skill to do the job. It was their ability to work in a team. It was their time management skills. It was their conflict resolution. It was any number of other things that prevented them from keeping that job. So we did all that work to help them find a job. We got them in a job, and within 6 months, the employer, in many cases, is telling us this just isn't going to work out. So how do we hear that as a public workforce system and better understand that idea of assessing and understanding where customers are? And again, not trying to force them into a specific program, back to my dream of this one workforce idea. Not just saying, oh, we're going to serve you with this federal program because this is the one that we think fits you best, but rather looking at them holistically. And maybe they need some HHS services, maybe they need some HUD services, maybe they need some education services. Whatever those services are, how do we marshal all of those resources to improve their ability to seek and maintain a job? And really understanding that all of those programs that I talk about, whether it's at Department of Defense or the Department of Energy or the Department of Labor, the end goal is to get folks to work, to get them a job. So how do we make sure that we're understanding where they are and what challenges they have, the barriers they have, and then overcoming those barriers?
So I want to, we've got 5 minutes left in this session, so I want to make sure that we have time for audience questions. So, and I know we have mic runners out there. We got one over here. Yes? I'm sorry, did we? Oh, it's Missy. Oh, I'm sorry. It's actually, it's quite hard to see.
This is Gary, officer from Senior Service America again.
Hey.
I spoke this morning where I referenced the needs of older Americans. And I want to thank you, Mr. Pallasch, for inviting us to your office a few months ago, when many of my colleagues, a few of them who were here, were able to present the importance of a thoughtful response to our nation's, to the working aspirations of our nation's older workers. Can you speak a little bit more specifically to the administration's both interest, or leadership, and or commitment to ensuring that older workers remain an important part of our workforce fabric and are contributors towards our nation's economy? Because in many of the existing programs, at least what I hear is that older workers have unique skill sets, right? They have unique needs that's not often met by these existing programs. So can you spend a little bit of time talking about our older workers and what we can do for them?
Absolutely. And I talked earlier about the dignity of work and the forgotten men and women. We're talking about an economy as strong as it is right now. The only thing that's going to slow it down is if we somehow don't deliver the workforce that businesses need to continue to grow, and we know that. So it's incumbent upon us at the federal level to understand whether we're talking about older Americans, whether we're talking about folks involved with the criminal justice system, whether we're talking about folks going through some type of opioid recovery. How do we use the funding that we have? How do we leverage that funding to serve targeted populations and provide that workforce that businesses need? They are starving for workers, so much so that they are maybe considering individuals that they wouldn't have considered in a different economy. And we need to capitalize on that, and we need to make real systemic change to the system now when it's as strong as it is, so that going forward, when there is the invariable downturn in the economy, and I'm not an economist, I don't know when it's going to happen, but it's going to happen at some point, that the system is better positioned through leveraging older Americans, through leveraging individuals, reentry population, all those targeted groups that I talked about, making sure that they've got a full role in the workforce system, and that employers understand that these are populations who can be excellent employees.
We have other questions.
Yes, thank you for all the information that you have provided to us. My name is Carmen Saenz. I work for the Montgomery County Department of Health and Human Services. We have a Welcome Back Center for over 10 years. And we have helped one of the vulnerable populations, dignity that you are talking, and we are very proud. I myself am an internationally trained industrial engineer, and I had the possibility to come to the United States 30 years ago and had the possibility of getting help, actually from my father, to get into a master's program, which was wonderful for me as a high-skilled immigrant to show what I can do. So this is a little example, but I work with hundreds of internationally trained health professionals. And as you say, this is very important, this dignity, to include in population that we may have not think of. But this is people who have been in this country like me for many years and who have a lot of talent to provide. And we had work with the Department of Labor of Maryland. We do access the WIOA funding, and this is an innovative program that has been supported. And I encourage everybody, as you said, to really reach out, because even though we have a lot of challenges, the partnerships among the different groups is crucial. I'm sitting with a person from Montgomery College here. Montgomery College has been crucial for us to provide the English language. We work with employers, with the hospitals, making sure they understand who our population is and what their needs are met. So I just want to thank and really look forward to continue working in this area.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. Yep.
Yes, hello, good afternoon. Adriana Crawford, Grant Associates. Wanted to have a comment and a question around this one workforce system. I think that when WIOA was written those 5-6 years ago, and with the inclusion of of course, the American Job Center system and the one-stop operator, that was in part to help align and coordinate a lot of these core services with co-location of some of these partners. And for those of us who are very familiar, deeply familiar with it, I think there's a lot of opportunity to make some adjustments. And so I'm wondering if those conversations are happening as we talk about reauthorization.
Absolutely. Casey and I were in Spokane earlier this week. Or I guess it was last week now.
Late last week.
Late last week. Visiting the HUD and Vision Center, which is co-located with their WorkSource, which is their American Job Center, in the same building. So, excuse me, absolutely, that flexibility exists. That ability for partners to come together locally and decide, hey, it makes more sense for us, we're serving the same populations, to be physically co-located. And they've worked through some of the challenges with the referrals and what does it look like sending folks upstairs and downstairs. And that's just one example of groups out there, states out there, locals out there that are taking advantage of that and bringing those partners together. The one workforce idea, I want to steamroll the rest of the hindrances to those groups coming together, because we can't expect every group to be as innovative and aggressive in terms of bringing those partners together, because I fully appreciate kind of the hurdles with the funding and the reporting issues. We won't even get into data collection and case management systems and what that looks like. But I encourage states like Washington State to continue to make those partnerships real and to bring those groups together and to leverage those local partners. And anything we can do to facilitate that, to further that, I'm happy to have those conversations.
And some of that is urban legend just busting. One of the things that I found in this role is that folks will say, well, my state says that I'm not allowed to do whatever it is. And I'll be like, well, why not? Do you have a state policy against it? Well, no, they say that it's your fault. They say there's some federal legislation, like this is because of the feds. And so we'll sit down and we'll start going through the act, or we'll go through whatever the regs are. I'm like, there's no rule about this thing that you're asking me about. This happens a lot, like once a week this happens to me, and I know it happens to John too. And I'll have college presidents call and they'll be like, I don't think I'm allowed to do this thing. And so we'll walk through what they're allowed to do, what they're not allowed to do, and pretty often they get off the phone and they're like, thanks. I didn't know I was allowed to do it. And so that's part of it, I would say too. So it's, yes, it's part of the WIOA reauthorization conversation, and if you have things that are real barriers in the law, for sure tell us, because certainly the parts that are from voc rehab, the parts that are in adult education, and then the parts that are from ETA, like we both want to know what do we need to bring to this conversation to advocate from the administration to change the law. But some of that conversation also might turn into one of us sitting down with you and being like, well, let's look at the law. Where is the limitation that is a perceived real, like not telling you it's not real in your space, just that it might not really be a barrier from us.
Absolutely.
Great. All right, well, so I want to be respectful of time, and I want to say thank you very much. And join me in thanking Assistant Secretary Pallasch and Deputy Assistant Secretary Sachs. Really appreciate your willingness to come and talk with us.
Yeah, thank you very much.